This is what I wrote to my older daughter trying to explain some of all of this. Lincoln ignorantly inspired the events that brought the ideals of the French Revolution into the lead of the American experience, and he did it with his Gettysburg Address speech, where he reversed the facts in saying the nation may have been conceived in liberty, but it was dedicated to the proposition that all men were created equal. Lincoln was playing with fire in that for raw personal political gain he was speaking about matters in which he was not expert, and since then has helped set the world on fire by the distortions that had resulted. Indeed, Lincoln had gained his political knowledge from reading pamphlets and newspapers. His opponents could read, write, and speak Greek and Latin, and were wholly familiar with these philosophically inspired contentions. New England's own religious brand of this kind of spirit, Puritanism, morphed into the Jacobin secular version, in no small measure aided by America's own romantic naturalist philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson, of Walden Pond, Massachusetts fame, and Thoreau, who came to be called American progressivism, founded on what Kentuckian Robert Penn Warren called the treasury of virtue, stored up by fighting one of those traditional governments, the Southern Confederacy. Indeed, I would argue that the South's defeat opened the door to the entire world's adopting or being forced to react to some version of a Jacobin-inspired ism. After the Northern victory in 1865 and the century between then and 1965, the world experienced the bloodiest 100 years known in all human history, as all those isms began to fight one another. The world was fractured asunder between 1776 and 1918. Where we end up living among the fragments is still in process. Because modern political entities are founded on a revolutionary ethic, they themselves are subject to revolutionary rearrangement. Many are familiar with Lord Acton's quote, "Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely." Acton was Sir John Dahlberg, one of the 19th century's preeminent political philosophers. What is almost wholly unknown about Acton is that he exchanged letters with Robert E. Lee after the Northern victory. In that correspondence, Acton said to Lee, "Therefore I deem that you were fighting the battles of our liberty, our progress, and our civilization, and I mourn for the stake which was lost at Richmond more deeply than I rejoice over that which was saved at Waterloo." Lee replied, "I yet believe that the maintenance of the rights and authority reserved to the states and to the people, the 10th Amendment, essential to safeguard the continuance of a free government, whereas the consolidation of the states into one vast republic, sure to be aggressive abroad and despotic at home, will be the certain precursor of that ruin which has overwhelmed all those that have preceded it. The South has contended only for the supremacy of the Constitution and the just administration of the laws made in pursuance to it." Later, Dahlberg wrote an analysis of the war in which he said, "The North has used the doctrines of democracy to destroy self-government. The South applied the principle of conditional federation, shared sovereignty, to cure the evils and to correct the errors of a false interpretation of democracy. And the inevitable result of an unfettered federal government will be the initiative and administration, the function of universal guardian and paymaster, the resources of coercion, intimidation, and corruption, the habit of preferring the public interest of the moment to the established law, a public creditor, a prodigious budget. These things will remain to the future government of the Federal Union and will make it approximate more closely to the imperial than to the republican type of democracy. By exhibiting the spectacle of a people claiming to be free, but whose love of freedom means hatreds of inequality, jealousy of limitations to power, and reliance on the modern state as an instrument to mold as well as to control society, it calls on its admirers to hate aristocracy and teaches its adversaries to fear the people." And just how many people's republics of this and that exist today? And in the name of a given political entity's power, consolidated in the claim to act in its people's will and for their benefit, just how many slaughters have occurred? The U.S. piece of this equation is daunting to see because we're blinded by New England's explanation of the country's founding and purpose in the world. We do not understand that our first experience with terrorism inspired by revolutionary fervor was John Brown's raid into Virginia to effect the violent overthrow of Southern governments, funded and inspired by that cooperation between New England's Puritans and Jacobins. It is significant that after many years of talking about separation, the South did so only after John Brown's raid revealed the true nature of where matters were headed. We know the end of that story. We're living in it. And where have matters been brought? We have witnessed all over the globe, as Lee put it, governments sure to be aggressive abroad and despotic at home, which claim to act in the name of their people to accomplish its particular vision of political perfection. The soldiers of the Confederacy fought with every ounce of their being to prevent converting our founding from one where people worked out their future cooperatively and not out of the barrel of a gun for the purpose of overthrowing all that had come before at the hands of governments given radical power to effect that overthrow. They owed it to their family, both those long dead and those yet to be born, to fight such a revolutionary and dangerous development. And I would suggest to you that is why the Confederacy adopted as its motto, Deo Vindice, God vindicates. My daughter, when she repeated some of what I've just shared in school, did not win many friends from the modern educational establishment, which perhaps ought to reveal something. And at this point, gentlemen, let me say some difficult things. This country is schizophrenic on these matters, and it is so precisely because it houses within its governmental structure, as the Canadian writer said, really two countries within its confines, one conservative and one revolutionary. Nowhere is that fact better demonstrated than in our current troubles in Iraq. Please allow me to get you to consider some observations. I ask you to recall what President Bush said in his second inaugural speech rendered in January 2005, given very close by the nomination to the federal bench of the conservative Justice Brown, whom I previously quoted. In that speech, Bush said, "The survival of liberty in our land increasingly depends on the success of liberty in other lands. The best hope for peace in our world is the expansion of freedom in all the world. It is the policy of the United States to seek and support the growth of democratic movements and institutions in every nation and culture, with the ultimate goal of ending tyranny in the world." Robespierre would have been proud. On other occasions, our purpose has been described as ending evil in the world, and our object to create in the Middle East a democratic society, rather than the sorts that have grown out of the cult of the mixture of Islamic and socialist Gnosticisms. Indeed, the famous speechwriter for Ronald Reagan, Peggy Noonan, in her criticism of that speech and policy, described it as too Jacobin for her, and that, quote, "To the extent our foreign policy is marked by a division, which has been defined as a division between moralists, modern Jacobin romantics, if you will, and realists, small c conservatives, if you'll allow, the moralist taken with a romantic longing to carry democracy and justice to foreign fields, the realist motivated by what might be called cynicism and an acknowledgement of the limits of government power, President Bush sided strongly with the moralists being those naturalist romantics allied with Rousseau and his children." New York native Noonan ends her criticism with the statement that one wishes for a sense that there are a few legitimate boundaries to the desires born in the goodness of their good hearts. One wonders if they shouldn't ease up, calm down, breathe deep, get more securely grounded. The most moving speeches summon us to the cause of what is actually possible. Perfection in the life of man on earth is not. Do we have a severe challenge facing us from a religious totalitarian view that has come to be called radical Islam?